sceneries were spectacular. These are the monkey puzzle trees, which are original from Chile. To actually go through forests of these monkey puzzle trees was actually fascinating. And then again, some of the landscapes that we camped in. This is under an active volcano, and you can just see all the lava flows, and occasionally we'd be camped and you'd hear this big explosion and there'd be a bit of lava being spat over the top, which was quite scary, but also sort of making you realise that how we are reliant on nature, in terms of nature has power, and we're there as guests, really. And then again, just another picture of some of the scenery that we went through. And a lot of it was, the only way was up. And I actually had an altimeter on my watch, and we worked out over the 11 months that we were cycling, we'd done the equivalent of Everest 13 times down. So it was quite phenomenal. And some days we were actually pushing up. And we tried to keep away from busy roads because we didn't want to be on the busy road. We tried to sort of look for sort of routes that were less sort of main routes. So by getting ourselves sort of further inland or away from the big routes, it allowed us to explore some really remote communities, which meant quite challenging cycling conditions at time, and a lot of pushing uphill at times. But yeah, the rewards were phenomenal because we'd arrive in little villages, and they were very curious as to what we were doing. What are these two idiots doing on their bicycles? Do you need a place to stay? And as I say, the hospitality we received, because they were curious and we were curious, and we were able to share some amazing experiences in terms of sitting down, having dinners, and to this day I'm still in touch with some of the people that we met 10 years ago. You know, so it is, yeah. And as I say, time and tide will wait for no man. So if you have dreams, if there is things that you want to do in life, take those opportunities. Yeah? And this was an opportunity that we took, and looking back on it, it's something that will live with us for the rest of our lives. And as we started to get north, especially on the Chilean side, we started to arrive into the Atacama Desert. And we were quite worried. This was one of the areas of the trip that quite worried me, because I knew that water was very, very scarce. So we weren't going to be able to stop in streams and filter water and get water. So we had to plan our days very, very carefully. And usually every sort of 60 to 100 kilometres they have these truck stops where you can get water. And most of that water is brought in by lorries. So it's quite a precious commodity. And again, what you'll find is along the road, the Chileans and the South Americans as a whole like their religious shrines. So it was interesting seeing all the different shrines that had been put up along the roads with different people asking for different things, and you could read notes, and quite an interesting place to stop and spend a couple of minutes looking at what people were going through and asking for. And then we were cycling near Antofagasta on the north side of Chile, and suddenly this huge hand appeared out in the desert, and this is a sculpture that was done to sort of represent the sort of people that are looking for things in life. And there's this sculpture, and there's one on the Chilean side, and there's another one in the east coast and on the west coast, and they're linked. And as I say, it's quite spectacular to sort of see this hand appear in the middle of the desert out of nowhere. And then again, some of the places that we arrived to were like ghost towns. This is from the British were out in the North Atacama Desert in the late 1800s, and it was all stemmed by the nitrates industry. So there's these whole towns and communities that built up sort of the late 1800s and 1900s, early 1900s. However, when the nitrate industry declined, these whole infrastructures, just people left. And to go back, they're almost 100 years later, you're walking through these ghost towns, but everything, and this is a railway network that was set in place. And as I say, just to be able to walk around these places, it was almost a little bit eerie to think that 100 years ago, these whole communities built up around that nitrate industry. After about 20 years, when the nitrate need for nitrates declined, the whole infrastructure that was left behind was quite amazing. And then going through some key sort of geographical points, so the tropics, and then moving on into the Atacama Desert. Again, sceneries that were just breathtaking. And then looking for those little camp spots, again, we found little spots that had a little bit of a stream where we could access the water. But what was quite interesting in Chile is that a lot of the communities that were in the Andes have had to move because they no longer have that water supply. And also the mining industry all along the Andes is taking a lot of that water away. So a lot of communities that relied on that water coming down from the mountains, because the mining companies have actually started to take that water for the mining industry, it's completely taken away the livelihoods of these communities. So it's quite interesting, again, visiting all these remote communities that have slowly declined because of lack of resources that have been no longer available to them. And then this is when we crossed into Bolivia, a small little mining town on the top of about 4,000 meters of altitude, a place called Oyagüe on the Bolivian and Chilean border. But yet the skies were absolutely spectacular, and the feeling of being out there. And then again, looking at some of the old machinery that was brought into to help build all the roads and railway networks to support that industry. And then coming into these remote Bolivian villages that rely on the alpacas and the llamas for their livelihoods. And again, the hospitality we received. It was just, again, you could not have asked for more. And then we got into the salt plains of Salar de Uyuni. If anybody knows Bolivia, there's these huge salt plains, and this is a little island in the salt lake. And being able to see that was absolutely spectacular. And we thought, wow, we are in the middle of this salt plain, middle of nowhere, hardly anybody around, and we met this couple cycling. Not only cycling, but they had their 2 kids with them. So he was a Scottish guy and she was Australian, and they'd taken 6 months out to go cycling. And they were cycling in Bolivia with their 2- and 4-year-old. And this is a picture of their kids. So we thought, God, we thought what we were doing was hard. They're doing it with their 2 kids. And it was fascinating to see the sort of the childhood they were having. Is like exploring things, and we're like, God, wow, different perspective. And then other travellers that we met. This Brazilian guy we met on the going into Cusco in Peru, and he'd been on the road for 13 years. He left Brazil 13 years ago with hardly anything, but he just had this desire to go and travel, and he travelled the whole of South America. And we met him while he was in Peru. And we had about an hour. We just got talking, and the stories he was telling, and it was just fantastic. What a way of life that I would never have imagined. 13 years cycling around South America. And you can see all the little mementos he gathered along the way. He's like, why are you carrying that big Michelin man? And he told me the story that somebody had given to him, and he didn't feel he could get rid of it because it meant quite a lot of sentimental value. And then we got into Cusco, which is where Kelly and I originally met, so that was quite a special moment in the Plaza de Armas in Cusco to revisit some of the places we had worked when we were working for the travel company. And then there was days where we just thought, oh God, what are we doing? We had about 4 or 5 days, because the way the valleys worked, you'd climb for about 3 or 4 days, get to the top, get down to the other side in about 20 minutes, and then you had another 3 days to get to the top before you did that again. So yeah, looking at things like that, like, oh right, really? But you just had to manage it in small little bite-sized chunks, and there was no pressure again. If we just did 20k a day, that was enough. And then we got into the north of Peru, and we dropped into the jungle, a place called Huánuco, and we came across, it was Easter. And we came across these most amazing religious celebrations where they were enacting the crucifixion of Jesus. And they had a French guy that they brought in specifically to play the part of Jesus. And we were the only foreigners apart from the French guy who was playing Jesus. So everybody thought we were related to him. So they kept on asking us, oh, what's he doing? Well, it was like, no, we're just here as guests. So it was quite funny. And we followed the whole procession for the whole day. The point where they went outside of the village and reenacted the crucifixion, so it was quite interesting
Did
watching.
they nail him to the cross?
They did, they actually tied his hand, but in some places they actually still, as a reenactment, they actually do crucify people. In some countries, yes. It's shocking, but that's what they do. It's their. No, unfortunately they didn't. They just tied him on, and
You two weren't the ones on either side.
well, that's quite amazing. And then coming out into Peru, this is Huaraz, Cordillera Blanca. If anybody remembers Touching the Void film or book, if you've read it, it's this is Cerro Huaraz, which is where that incident happened, and we were cycling along and then dropping down back onto the coastline through these spectacular canyons. And it's like the scenery, and it's like if you fell off there you wouldn't probably have much chance of getting back up there, but how these little roads have been cut into the side of the mountains and people use them to get up into the hills and back out of them. It's like really, really precarious, but as I say, it's spectacular how they've managed to build these feats to try and communicate between the hills and the coast. And then again, more cyclists. These were Argentinian brothers that were cycling around, and then meeting local children and communities. And when we set off, we decided we were going to do it for charity as well. So we were raising funds for Julia House here in Poole, and we were also raising funds for an international charity called SOS Children's Villages. So along the way we had the opportunity to come and visit some of the projects that we were raising funds for. So that was quite rewarding. And then, as I say, some places we'd arrive and people would come out and mob us and also just want to sort of interact and find out what we were up to. And those spontaneous moments where you just weren't planning on staying there, suddenly you end up staying there for 2 or 3 days and meeting these amazing communities who just want to share the little they have. They want to share with you and listen to your stories, and you listen to their stories. And again, it was just so rewarding to be able to do that. And then again, talking about families on bikes, we met this American couple who was cycling from Alaska to Argentina. And they were actually going to be featured in the World Guinness Book of Records as the youngest children to ever cycle that length. And it was great to follow them, because we've been following them from Alaska, and we've been starting from the south, so we eventually got to see them. And then another milestone was going over the equator, you know, going through Ecuador into Colombia. And what was amazing is that everybody was saying, oh, you're going to go into Colombia? You must be crazy. You're going to get mugged, you're going to get robbed, you're going to get murdered. But yet the hospitality of the Colombian people was second to none. And it was interesting because they were running a campaign saying the only danger in Colombia is that you might want to stay. And that was very true, because we did want to stay in Colombia because we absolutely loved it. We spent quite a lot of time on a coffee plantation. We ended up doing some voluntary work at a coffee plantation, and Kelly did some teaching in the local, English teaching in the local community, and those opportunities just came out of nowhere. You know, and it was really difficult to actually leave after we spent 2 weeks in this small community up in the Colombian-Ecuador border. And then going across the Panama Canal, seeing that feat of engineering, we pretty much cycled the length of the Panama Canal, and to actually see all the work that had gone in there to get that canal built. And then a few mechanical problems which we dealt with along the way. But again, we wanted to be self-sufficient and have everything that we needed to be able to fix the bikes, and then tapping into the local communities. And they were so resourceful, because they would fix everything. Things like my shoes here in the UK, if you get to the point where your shoes are no longer good, you probably chuck them in the bin. Whereas there, you take them down the local market, and they pretty much give you back a new pair of shoes because they've sewn it all together, fixed it. So they were so resourceful. And that's what I found, that in the UK we no longer have that. Whereas in communities like that, you can go in and find the local shoe fixer. So my message is that this is a brief life, but in its brevity it offers us some splendid moments and some meaningful adventures. And this trip really gave me those opportunities to be able to do that. Meeting local people, trying the local foods, just on the roadside cafes where you'd stop and have a nice empanada. and then going to the local markets, buying the local fresh food, and then finally arriving in Mexico, which was like, wow, did we really cycle all this way? You know, it was fascinating just to get over the border into Mexico. And what I particularly liked is going over the borders, because you always have that hustle and bustle of crossing the borders, and there was all these different people trying to sell you things and offering you services, and it was quite a magical place to go across the different borders and seeing how entrepreneurial people are, setting up all the small businesses that rely on the border crossings. And then my big message to everybody is that 20 years from now you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. Therefore, explore, dream and discover. So if you've got any dreams, whether it's a business, whether it's going travelling, whether it's owning a boat or going, you know, you have to work hard to get there, but follow your dreams. And as I say, we did that, and we managed to cycle through 13 countries. In 11 months, we clocked 10,000 miles, an average of about 60 miles a day, that works out at, and we lived on £5 each. So our budget for the whole trip was £10 between the two of us.
What?
£10 for the £10 per day. Yeah, it would have been nice £10 a day. I'd still be cycling. So we did it on a really, really tight budget. But yet the rewards have been absolutely unforgettable. New friends and unforgettable experiences. So that's really a little bit of a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we experienced cycling through South America. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm happy to take questions if anybody's got any particular questions, but I am very conscious of time, because I know I could talk for hours, but hopefully it's been inspiring. And
you mentioned about the hospitality you were receiving anywhere, but did you encounter anything hostile at all?
We had one event which was an attempted robbery, and it was our own fault really, because we had some friends that joined us in Ecuador for 2 weeks, and we relaxed. So every night when we set up camp, we waited until it was getting dusk, and then we would sort of take away sort of a couple of 100 metres off the road. But that particular night we decided just to camp quite close to the road, and we also had a fire going. So some local youths had seen us, and at about 2 o'clock in the morning they decided to crawl upon a tent to try and nick our bikes. But I heard the noise, and I jumped out and I tackled them in Spanish and said, "What are you doing?" And they were more shocked that I could speak Spanish, and they just ran off. So in 11 months to have that small incident, that was it really. But it was interesting because everywhere we went, people would tell us, "Oh, be careful if you go into the next village because you might get." So it was all that not knowing, and it's fear of the unknown. And the ironic thing is that we got back to Peru, we got back from our travels, and Kelly, my other half, had a wallet stolen in Asda in Poland. And that happened within a couple of weeks of coming back. So if it's going to happen, it can happen anywhere. But we just have that fear of, oh no, you can't go there because this is going to happen, this dreadful thing's going to happen to you. So it's how we perceive things, yeah.
So what's the next plan? What's the next
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's what I'm working on at the moment. So we've decided we're going to call it Project 2023. So for my 50th, I've got 2 children now. I've got a 6 and a 4-year-old, so they'll be 11 and 9. So we've decided we're going to quit our jobs and we're going to take them travelling. So we're deciding whether we're going to do it as a cycle trip. As I say, I've got unfinished business, so I'd like to cycle from Mexico to Alaska. But my other half's very much drawn to Asia because she used to work a lot in Vietnam and China. So she wants to go back to Asia. So I think we're going to have to find a compromise in 6 months in one place, 6 months in the other. So yeah, that's what we're working on at the moment.
Just quickly, what were the other 2 trips you've done? The other 2 things?
Oh God, yeah. Well, there's been a few other trips. So back in 2012, I got approached by a good friend of mine to row across the Atlantic. So in 2012, we rowed across the Atlantic from Morocco to Barbados. And we became the first pair to row unsupported from Agadir in Morocco to Barbados. So most people leave from the Canaries, and they do the Canaries to Barbados route. And now, having left from Morocco, I can see why people leave from the Canaries. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
And then I've done a lot of kayaking as well, so I've kayaked all around the southwest peninsula. So we kayaked all the way from Foy back to Poole. That took us 11 days of kayaking. So yeah, there's been a number of different small challenges. And what I say is that a challenge doesn't have to be this huge expedition. You know, people have, oh well, you're going to go out and, you know, a challenge can be getting up in the morning and going and watching the sunrise. You know, it can be doing a 5K. If you're not a runner, you can't expect to go off and do a marathon. If that's what you want to do, then you work towards doing that marathon. But it can be anything. You know, challenge yourself to do something that is slightly out of your comfort zone, or do something different that you don't do as part of your daily routine. And I say that can be a simple thing, like going and watching the sunset from Lake Pier. You know, that is an amazing thing. But I mean, we all live and we're all busy in our daily things, but take that little bit of time out to go and appreciate those small things. The simple things in life are usually the most rewarding, and that's one of the lessons that I take away from the adventures that I do.
Thank you, David. Has anyone got anything else? No? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excellent.